Thank you very much. I can categorically say that I did not want a baby with Down syndrome. Indeed, I'd paid to have private tests to ensure I didn't, which is rather strange given I'd never actually met anyone with Down syndrome. But everything I'd ever experienced or heard about the condition seemed negative. I had in my mind the image of a teenage boy with a crap haircut, wearing flares and a tank top, stood next to the side of a road holding his elderly mother's hand. And I could remember as a child being aware of kids with Down syndrome being shipped off in buses to special schools. And sometimes we'd be out and about, and a group of people with learning difficulties would arrive en masse by minibus. They felt very much a separate entity, people living in a parallel world, one that I didn't want to belong to. Pregnant at 39, I knew my risk of having one of these babies was greater. I was worried and concerned. And on my 20-week scan, I felt my world shudder when the sonographer advised she thought baby may have talipes, clubfoot, and that can be indicative of a chromosomal disorder such as Down syndrome. It was a Friday afternoon, and they booked me in immediately for an amniocentesis the following week. I knew that we'd consider termination. After all, isn't that why we screen and what everybody does? I went home and Googled. The images and messages weren't great. But an amniocentesis carries a risk of miscarriage. And having suffered 4 prior to having our daughter Emily, I persuaded myself that surely this time everything would be okay. And so on the Monday morning, I phoned up and cancelled the amnio. Still makes me wobble now, because I feel that was probably the best decision I've ever made in my life. Tom was born on a Monday morning at 10:04 in August 2004. And for 24 hours, I was euphoric. Our beautiful daughter Emily now had a gorgeous baby brother. This was everything I'd ever wanted. My life was complete. A day later, the Tuesday morning, a paediatrician clumsily and awkwardly expressed concern to me that they thought Tom had Down syndrome. And she asked me if my precious baby boy looked normal. My world fell apart, and I was offered absolutely no support to rebuild it. Words fail to express the complete and utter despair and devastation I felt. Gone was this gorgeous baby that I'd had the day before, and instead replaced with this unknown entity, a baby society led me to believe I didn't want, who junior doctors were now queuing up to examine, to spot the markers. He'd become a medical exhibit, and I was becoming more and more distant from him. Doctors and midwives were asking me, "Didn't you know? Didn't you have the tests?" Inferring, had I done so, Tom wouldn't be here. We considered having Tom adopted. After all, it was what friends had done less than a year before. And on the Tuesday night, Tom was in Skaboo, and I was alone in a side room, unable to sleep. Grieving for the baby I'd hoped for and expected. Terrified of the future, and I actually wondered whether it would be better for us all if Tom didn't survive. The maternal bond, the absolute unconditional love I'd felt for my baby had been severed. And it took me a long time before I had the strength and resilience, and I started to fall back in love with my baby. And I started to ask myself, what is so wrong with him having Down syndrome? Why had a midwife cried and consoled me? And why do we as a society screen and invariably terminate? Because Tom was showing me that he has the same needs as any other baby and child, to be watered, fed, and loved. He has taught me so much more, that everybody brings something to the table. We all have our own strengths and weaknesses. Everybody with Down syndrome has a learning disability, and so it does take him longer to learn and master new skills. But we celebrate them so much more because he has to put in the effort. My perceptions of Down syndrome have been influenced by my childhood experiences. People being kept at arm's length, segregated and excluded from our community. And I realised that had I been born with Down syndrome, chances are my parents would have been told to leave me at the hospital, forget about me, go home and try again. Because only, just in the 60s, people with Down syndrome's life expectancy was Tom's age, 15 years. There was little medical interventions, people were routinely institutionalized, and no education. But life for people now has improved dramatically. Life expectancy is now well into the 60s and improving all the time. Our children and young people are flourishing in mainstream education and going on to lead full and rewarding lives. Tom aspires, yes. Because they're given the opportunity. Tom aspires to get a job. He wants to have a dog, get a flat, and get married. He also wants to ride a motorbike, grow a beard, and a man bun. That haircut come back to haunt me. But despite the phenomenal advances, attitudes around Down syndrome really have not moved on much, particularly in maternity services. And we know that generally when an expectant woman's advised that baby may have Down syndrome, the news is presented in a negative manner. I conducted a survey last year of 1,400 women who've had a baby with Down syndrome in the UK. And of those who discovered whilst pregnant that baby has Down syndrome, 69%, when they were given the news baby has Down syndrome, were offered a termination in the same conversation. Many were even given a time and date. And we talk about a woman's choice. Now, imagine changing the words, "I'm really sorry, but baby's got Down syndrome," to, "I'm so sorry, baby's a girl, black, gay." We'd be horrified. But baby won't get into grammar school? Terminate and try again. No one bats an eye. And it's legal in the UK for women to terminate a baby to full term because of baby having Down syndrome. I know a mum, Sarah, who knew that she was expecting a little girl with Down syndrome, and at 36 weeks went for a scan and was advised baby would be induced the following morning. The consultant then went on to say, "But it's not too late. You can still change your mind." Sarah advised quite clearly she was continuing, and the doctor said, "When baby arrives, if she needs any intervention, do you want us to help or shall we leave her?" And these attitudes are not uncommon. Unfortunately, I hear them all the time through the organisations I run. Emma, who's now mum to Jamie, she thinks she was offered a termination 15 times. And at 34 weeks, she was advised that until baby had actually started to proceed along the birth canal, she could terminate. Let's be honest, there's a bloody big elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. People get rather twitchy if we use the word eugenics. But the fact is, Tom has a different genetic makeup to you and I, and in many people's eyes that makes him inferior, his life not worth living. And we have an NHS-funded screening programme that threatens the very existence of Down syndrome. It might come as no surprise that in a society that pressures women to screen, that has an assumption that they will go on to terminate, and offers little, if any, information and support, that of women who discover baby has Down syndrome whilst they're pregnant, 90% go on to terminate. I know I could have fallen into that 90%, and that terrifies me. How many women every day are making life-death decisions without understanding the reality of Down syndrome in modern Britain? To address this, I created a website, Positive About Down syndrome. It's full of stories and photos written by parents and indeed young people with Down syndrome to show the reality of our lives. But we must also accept that this extends beyond the maternity ward. We consider ourselves a pretty inclusive society now. We embrace people of different religious beliefs, ethnic backgrounds, sexuality. People with physical disabilities even make it on Strictly Come Dancing. How jolly inclusive we all are. But I see how people with Down syndrome are still routinely excluded from their communities. Whether it be the little girl at primary school who has unclear speech and isn't invited to the birthday party. The young chap who struggles to express his feelings, his thoughts as quickly and coherently as his friends is ignored. Or the man looking for a work opportunity is offered nothing, is shunned. We all, as members of a community and society, have a part to play in ensuring that people with learning disabilities, not just Down syndrome, are included, valued members of society and are not outsiders. 15 years ago, I thought I'd given birth to a Downs baby, a baby defined by and labelled by his condition. How wrong was I? Tom is a charming, well-mannered young chap who happens to have Down syndrome. It doesn't define him. He's a spotty, hairy teenager who's a passionate West Brom fan, who has a fantastic sense of humour and loves his life. He's the kid in his tutor group at school who'll say hello to the lad that everyone else ignores. He doesn't judge you by the trainers you wear or the car you drive. He doesn't moan. I'm making him sound perfect. He's not jealous. He would share his favourite meal of fish and chips with you and give you his last Rolo every time. We all have a lot to learn from Tom. He accepts people as they are and he says it how it is, which at times can be a little tricky. I find myself having to explain that it's okay perhaps to refer to an elephant as ginormous, but not the rather large chap walking towards us down the parade. Or you can label an eagle as bald-headed, but not your mate's dad. Despite the advances that people with Down syndrome now make, it's no longer life-limiting. People are educated in mainstream schools. I still hear of doctors telling expectant women that their baby will suffer. And I can hand on heart say that Tom suffers nothing more than people's ignorance and prejudice. When he was a baby, I was led to believe he was going to have a negative impact on our lives. To the contrary, he's enriched and enhanced our lives, and we are without doubt better people for having him in them. I worried he wouldn't be able to go to a normal school. He's at North Leamington where he's thriving. I was concerned we'd never go on holiday again. We'd been fortunate enough to travel the world. I was led to believe he'd be a burden to his sister. Couldn't be further from the truth. They have the best relationship and adore each other. 2 years ago, when Emily was critically ill, in an induced coma, on life support, and she's my typical child who's not a problem. When she came round out the coma, my husband and I were offering her the world. All she wanted was her brother. I know now how desperately ignorant I was, and I want medical professionals and you to know that there's nothing to be sorry about, that having a baby with an extra chromosome is not the end of the world, but rather the start of an amazing journey. A roller coaster at times, but the benefits far, far outweigh the challenges. I love both my children to the moon and back. Both make my heart burst with pride. Both give me sleepless nights. And that, in my book, is what parenting is all about. Thank you.